I will be blunt as usual, and I will present to you what I see as the situation emerging in the Sinai Peninsula, 61,000 square kilometers, almost 3 times the size of the State of Israel. I agree with colleagues in the Egyptian media who were writing recently that Sinai is a ticking bomb. My formulation is that Sinai is the black hole in the triangle of peace, Israel, Jordan, Egypt. And in the past 48 hours or so, we had a public controversy between the Israeli Chief of Staff, General Benny Gantz, who says there is serious terrorist infrastructure emerging in the peninsula, and the governor of northern Sinai, where the problem is, General retired Abdel Wahab Mabruk, who is saying no terrorist infrastructure in Sinai. And of course, General Tantawi himself said it's 100% security in the Sinai. I hate to differ, but I think this is not the case. The Sinai, in my opinion, has become a source of imminent danger of a flare-up which may affect, negatively of course, the fragile fabric of the Egyptian-Israeli peace structure, but also relations with Jordan. I would like to stress here that from the Bedouin point of view, the areas which lie from southern Jordan through the Israeli Negev into the Sinai constitute one vast space for these tribes. There are no fences there. They do not recognize the border. Movement of Bedouins traditionally between the Sinai, the Israeli Negev, and Jordan has been almost uncurtailed. I'll give an example from the Jordanians. The Jordanians turn a blind eye on smuggling, drugs, for example. They prevent vigorously any attempts to deal with terrorist activity, so far very successfully. So the Sinai is no longer an area, as it was throughout history, either a buffer between the Levant and Mesopotamia and the Nile Valley. Egyptian historians wrote about the Sinai as sandbox. The Israeli great strategist Yigal Allon wrote about the screen of sand. The Sinai is no longer a buffer or merely a transit area for armies. 90% of invasions of Egypt occurred through the Sinai. The Sinai is becoming an area which is in many ways semi-autonomous. My argument is, I'm very sad to have to say that the Egyptian government, especially, this process was accelerated after the anti-Mubarak revolution. The Egyptian government, in many senses, has become an absentee landlord in good parts of the peninsula. The Bedouin tribes, Sawarka, Tarabin, Tiyaha, Azazme, there are about 30 of them altogether, depends how you count. The Bedouin tribes, in many ways, have become semi-autonomous. The tribes have transformed themselves. I'm speaking mainly about the central and northern part of the peninsula. In the south, it's different, and I will not touch upon it. The tribes have transformed themselves in armed militias from smuggling drugs and human trafficking. They have developed into networks, very elaborate networks of supply, no longer smuggling, it's openly. Supply of huge amounts of arms and munitions. The Toyota pickup is the new camel. And if I can, I will try to recite to you a few lines of Bedouin poetry written by an elder of the Tiyaha tribe, central of the peninsula, an illiterate man, about the new camel of the Bedouins. He says, "O rider of a noble mount, no camel stick can steer, whose name in dates and numbers on her mouth is picked out clear. She will do 200 kilometers per hour according to the dial, like Saddam's army launching from its Pad-Escad missile. Toyota is her model, and Toyota is her make." And he finishes by saying, "The workmanship would not disappoint. These foreigners don't fake." This is the new camel. And the Bedouins now are armed with fleets of mainly Toyota pickups on which heavy machine guns are mounted. And in numerous occasions, they were not shy to use it, especially against the Egyptian police. Let me say a few words about the current up-to-date situation in the peninsula. Number one, we have now Egyptian military reinforcements. I'm not going into the arms limitations according to the 79 peace treaty and the military protocol, which prohibits the Egyptian military from presence in regions B and C in the central and eastern side of the peninsula. Today, we have Egyptian reinforcements in zones B and C, especially in the northeastern part of the peninsula. For the first time ever since the peace treaty was signed, Israel has agreed, through the MFO, Israel has agreed to the deployment of Egyptian tanks close to its borders. Egypt did not finally take advantage of the Israeli consent, which was limited in time. But we have between around 6 battalions of the Egyptian army now deployed where they were not deployed before. Number two, the Israeli army, the IDF, has doubled its deployment along Zone D, along the Israeli Sinai Peninsula, from 4 to 8 battalions on a permanent, regular basis, trying to defend the border. Point 3, especially since the, I'll make a comment before, I will say, Salafi brackets, jihadi movements amongst the Bedouins started in the late 80s. And they were in quite fierce competition with the older, more established Sufi orders amongst the Bedouins. But since the latest Egyptian revolution, we have seen the rise of many Salafi jihadi movements amongst the Bedouins, many associations representing them, all the way El Arish, Sheikh Zoued, Egyptian Rafah, wherever you go in that area. And we see a phenomenon that we've never encountered before. Bedouins who are now identifying themselves as Salafis, as followers of the Salafi doctrine or a Salafi doctrine, are leaving the tribes' encampments and establishing new encampments, which are purely Salafi. So you have like new settlements in most tribes, central and northern part of the peninsula, in which you have these new colonies of Salafi jihadi groups. The other new element is that Israel, at an accelerated pace, is erecting a 240 kilometers or so of double fence along the Sinai Peninsula. It's the first time ever that you will have a barrier along this territory. This is done with a budget of close to 1.5 billion shekels. It's supposed to be, when it's completed, hopefully late 2012, about 5 meters high, and dug 1.5 meters into the ground, with, of course, much of the electronics and equipment which goes with it. The other, and probably the essential element in the picture, is the collapse, total collapse, of the Egyptian police and general intelligence, Mukhabarat, Omar Sliman's, today Muwafi's organization, all over the Sinai Peninsula. And it was the doctrine for years of the Egyptian army, and especially General Tantawi, to let the police and General Intel deal with the Bedouins and the situation in the Sinai. The Egyptian military today, SCAF, wanted nothing to do with the population of the peninsula. Israelis were begging for years, for example, that the Egyptian military will take measures to protect the gas pipeline, providing Israel with about roughly 40% of its needs from Egypt. The Egyptian army said no. Several Israeli defense ministers have offered to the Egyptian government, and sometimes Tantawi himself, to accept deployment of Egyptian military, as happened now, in areas, in zones B and C. Invariably, the answer of the people who are today the SCAF was no. The collapse of the Egyptian police and General Intel, by the way, means that the main player in the Sinai today on the part of the Egyptian state is military intelligence, which has different methods and different capabilities and different norms than General Intel. I will not go into that. This led for an armed attack by dozens of Bedouins and motorbikes and pickups on the second police station in El Arish. The collapse has led to 7 explosions, blow-ups of the gas pipeline in the El Arish, Sheikh Zuweid area. It led to frequently armed Bedouins cutting the road leading to the trade terminal between Egypt and Israel in El Oja, or in Hebrew, Nitzana, simply stopping all traffic, all of merchandise. This is a very frequent occurrence. Bedouins of the Tarabin have no problem fighting Egyptian forces that venture into the area of Wadi Amer and other places in the peninsula. And the collapse has led, and I will not go into that, into large-scale trade in human organs, harvested from African immigrants making their way from mainland Egypt through the Sinai with Bedouin guides into Israel. Quite a few of them do not get to the Israeli border. And just 3 days ago, there was quite an armed skirmish, armed skirmish with firearms between the Nahlawi and the Tiyaha over human organs, the trades and the profit of that. Now, if I can go to the August 18th attack on the road, Route 12, leading to Eilat, what we saw there for the first time, not only was the attack, which was a very elaborate attack, carried out completely by Sinawis, no Palestinians involved, except as financiers and directors from afar. It was carried out all by Sinawis. For the first time ever, we saw Sinawi Bedouin suicide bombers. 4 of them. One of them exploded himself, an Egyptian policeman. We have never seen Bedouins in suicide bombing missions before. Generally, if you go back to Naum Shuker, who wrote the master book on the Sinai, history of the Sinai, in 1916, almost 100 years ago. He wrote it for he was employed by British intelligence in Egypt, and he wrote, it's dedicated to General Reginald Wingate. Shuker writes something which was true for many years later. The Bedouins were never devout Muslims. Muslims, yes, but they were not fundamentalists. They were not religious. They prayed sometimes. Now we see something which is, as I mentioned before, very different. So I said suicide bombers, and I say something else which is very important. But I will not elaborate on that at this point, which is we also saw for the first time anti-aircraft missiles being fired from the Sinai against Israeli helicopters, which came to the rescue. And in the Sinai today, they have SA-14, they have SA-16, they have SA-18. Yes or no, more advanced types, which can have major impact in many ways. A few words about the Palestinians. We have a Palestinian population in the north, population of Palestinian origin, Fawahra in El Arish and many others in the northeastern part of the peninsula, El Arish and eastbound. Many of these Palestinians have families in the Gaza Strip. Many of these Palestinians have 2 homes, one in Gaza, one in the Sinai. They are being recruited, or there is a major effort by Hamas to recruit Palestinians in this area to the organization. Same goes for Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And Hamas views today and acts as if the Sinai, and especially its Palestinian population, but now they are extending it more and more towards the Bedouins, that the Sinai is a sphere of influence, and very often disregarding warnings, advice given to Hamas by the Egyptian authorities. The climax for me was when the chief of Hamas military intelligence, Mohammed Dababish, important fellow, Dababish was arrested by the Egyptians and under pressure because of activities that the Egyptians didn't like in the Sinai Peninsula, and was released under Hamas pressure. The guy that the Egyptian kept for similar activity for a few years in prison, Ayman Naufal, commander of the Khan Yunis brigade of Hamas, of course, fled prison during the revolution when they released everybody from everywhere. This whole new network, which, and I'm just touching upon the headlines, is based on black economy, smuggling, which we estimate at anything between $300 million a year and $500 million a year. That's the scope, the volume of trade through the 1,200 tunnels to Gaza. Not all of them, of course, operating at every single moment, and between Sinai, Israel, and Jordan. The Egyptian government had, under Sadat, I remember well many conversations I had the privilege of having with Sadat about that. Sadat had the vision of having 5 million people in the Sinai, of inhabiting the Sinai and moving people from the Nile Delta and the valley into the Sinai. Huge development plans. Very little came out of it. The basic reason, they had a plan, for example, by 2018 to get 2.9 million Egyptians to settle in the Sinai, in addition to the local population, which is roughly 400,000, around this number. Nothing came out of it. The Egyptians who moved to the Sinai mostly work in the Sinai, but maintain their families and main residence back in Cairo, Bahriya, Sha'iyya, wherever. The Egyptian government under Mubarak, by 1997, basically stopped funding the major development projects for the Sinai, diverting the money to another ambitious program, which is the Toshka Canal in Egypt itself. There is no way, it's very unfortunate, there is no way, I'm giving you my conclusion, that even a major development program to be initiated by the new Egyptian government now, and they are talking about one, will be able to compete within the forthcoming years with the black economy that I have described here. The Bedouins do not really have an interest in becoming loyal Egyptians. Now, Rob, you will let me know when I have to finish. I want to read to you, so you don't suspect it's only me. I want to read to you from my translation of a Bedouin intellectual that I have a lot of respect for. His name is Mas'ad Abu Fajr. He writes about the relations between the Egyptian state and the Bedouins. And the quote is, "We drink torture, discrimination, deportation, and arrogance minute by minute, so that some felt that humiliation, just like blood, runs in our veins. The greatest sheikh of our tribe is sent by the police informer to buy him cigarettes from the kiosk in front of the police station. And as to us, we have become like circus acrobats between the ropes, playing with national security to get protection from state security. And those who did not find a place with national security played with state security to be protected against the Bedouin Affairs Department. All this relates to our elders, whilst we, the ordinary people, had to bypass the roadblocks on the roads to change our dwellings and the license plates of our car so as to avoid insults. We strive as much as possible to avoid government offices, and if we are forced to go there, we would seek a go-between to whom we pay to release us from the humiliation we encounter dealing with officials. This is just an illustration. There is a lot of bad blood between the Egyptian state and the Bedouins, especially after what the Bedouins consider to be the repression after the bombings of 2004, 2006 along the tourism strip of the Gulf of Aqaba, where thousands of Bedouins, including Abu Fajr, were detained without trial. I will probably time for me to wind up, and I will say this. There is a major threat that if this state of affairs is allowed to continue, we may see in the Sinai a development which is similar to what we saw in Lebanon and Jordan, a sort of Fatah land, an area of friction and hostilities between the two countries, not necessarily between the two armies or the two governments. Just like Fatah was operating out of Jordan or Hezbollah out of Lebanon, that's a situation that can repeat itself along this very sensitive border. Now, what is called for? I was personally toying with the idea that it would be a good move on our part, on Israel's part, to initiate amendment of the peace treaty, especially the military protocol between Israel and Egypt. I saw to myself at the time, no longer, that we have an interest in having the Egyptians assert their control over the peninsula, and we have an interest in the post-Mubarak Egyptian government reaffirming the peace treaty after amendments. I've reached the conclusion, I don't do that very often, that I was totally wrong. I think in spite of calls that we hear from Egypt, we have in this case to listen to the advice of Amr Moussa, a presidential candidate. Amr Moussa says, don't touch the treaty. If you touch the treaty, even for a technical amendment of the military protocol, Egyptian politicians and parties will tear it apart. Now, in order for the Egyptians to be able to deploy more seriously in the Sinai, we can use the agreed activities mechanism, which exists for over a decade between Israel and Egypt, in which the two parties, with the good services of the MFO, will agree on reinforcements and movement of troops as has happened now and was happening through the years. So the Egyptian deployment in the Sinai can and probably should be modified. It doesn't take an amendment of the peace treaty. I'll end by saying that the problem, as I came to understand it, is not a problem of capabilities. The Egyptian state has the capabilities to control the area and to control the population, or those elements of the population who have joined the terrorist infrastructure. The main problem is whether the Egyptian government is interested in dealing with the indigenous Bedouin population. So far, the preference of the Egyptian government, Mubarak and post-Mubarak, was to try, strive, and protect what they consider to be, perceived to be, Egyptian national security interests, but not to try too hard if the Bedouins are moving in the direction of Gaza and Israel.